previous recordings, particularly the one from the south of England, Portsmouth, were dealing with questions: how come a nurse has a job to explain phenomena they see? What is the job of a nurse in this? What's a nurse's unique contribution to the world? And as I said, using or employing the World Health Organization's definition of nursing as such, as a unique role, the nurse is the person who is helping any individual, any person, to regain, maintain or develop their own health in a way they would have done so if they had enough knowledge, will or power to do so. My job is, as a nurse, is to contribute to that, give some information. And the reason I'm doing so, because there seems to be a significant amount of anomy in our society, referring back to Emil Durkheim. German-sounding name, but he was a French philosopher, shall we say economist, at the end of the 18th century, who said that in a society there is a certain amount of adversity, certain amount of anomy, things like suicide, prostitutes, so on and so forth, criminal activity. That is a good indicator whether a society or a culture functions well or has some issues that may exacerbate and might need resolving. Good evening, this is 1st of November 2021. Greetings from the heart of Budapest. Unusual for me to do a shooting from such a remote point of Europe compared to England. But this was an opportunity which I've taken on this occasion in order to invest into the future. So, science, scientific inquiry. Why do we need science now? Well, I know from my studies, and particularly lucky I must be, and I consider myself to be in this respect, because in my academic career, research itself as a main study was an important part of my education, both in higher education in Hungary and also in the United Kingdom in England, where I did some relevant courses and eventually finished with a postgraduate diploma in research. So, science is a tool for us now these days when we try to find answers to questions that we cannot answer in a reassuring way using common sense. Also, it partly became a kind of trying to gain explanation to phenomena we could not explain even before that. But we had religion and we had the church as an institute to explain those things to us. Basically, there are two kinds of scientific inquiry. One of them is what we call induction, and the other one is deduction. So, for instance, if someone only sees throughout their lives white swans, they may come to the conclusion that all swans are white. And exactly that was the conclusion the English came to, until they traveled to Australia and first faced black swans, i.e. a theory, any kind of assumption, let it be scientific or not, cannot be confirmed or even rejected based on observation, sufficiently large amounts of observation. And the branch of mathematics that we find very useful in such inquiry is called statistics, with good predicting value. Modern science, such as medicine, is concerned with trying to measure, control and predict everything. So much so, at some point, it had become the view of many within modern science that anything that is not measurable, not controllable, does not exist. However, now we are in the post-positivism, the post-modern age of science also, and we know that there are lots of other things that influence our life or outcome, or even chance, that cannot be measured, controlled, and predicted. Let's listen to the bells to chime, and I continue shortly. It's a little bit long one, but the viewers will enjoy it because this recording is made with Dolby, Dolby on, so the sound should be fabulous. I'm just next to the Pest foot of Elizabeth Bridge in the heart of Budapest. That's gonna be a nice long cut. Well, that's the benefit of live broadcast. Very long. I think there must be Mass because it's 1st of November, All Saints Day here in Hungary. Why this is important, why we need to talk about these things, and the trigger for that kind of explanation comes from the fact that how people respond to the unknown, to the inquiry, to exploration, or even to difference or diversity. In the United Kingdom, it's almost uniform. Anybody who was trained, educated in the UK, had their secondary education and upwards in the United Kingdom, almost always, in my experience, respond to any diversity, difference, unknownness with fear. And as such, a sort of adrenaline, cortisol mediated, amygdala orchestrated response to it that is inherently causing a lot narrower bandwidth to have a look what the options and opportunities, and not can only to be seen everything as adversity with that. Why is that? Why is that happening? I think the explanation is complex, more than just one item or one thing. You need to go back as far as the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Why is that? The home of Industrial Revolution, as we know from the beginning or the middle of the 19th century, was the United Kingdom, indeed. And they needed fast, lots of workforce in order to produce a lot, and also to take the opportunity that the start of the Industrial Revolution brought to them. Meaning that there was no time to have thorough education to all the workers who would have been needed in the mill, on the production line. So the decision, I think, somehow was made at some point that we're going to teach what is necessary for the individual workers to do the work, the job they needed to do, and their manager, their foreman, their seniors, their elite would provide the tools and explanation and would have the knowledge and education needed to handle more complex issues. It had been working well in the positivist approach of modern science, meaning measure, control, predict. It made production very uniform. And that was the problem, eventually, with not only in the capitalist countries these days, as we can see with the pandemics, in particularly protruding nicely, telling to the world that all the methods and that kind of simplistic approach was actually unhelpful, but also in the socialist era, because people are by no means uniform. In the UK, most eloquently, we could see this when they tried to create those high-rise buildings, those high-rise buildings and estates around it, but without a community or without a culture, that resulted in developing ghettos as opposed to human communities. I'm pleased to say I live in Vauxhall in England, and in the nearby development of 9 Elms, there is a massive scale redevelopment and industrial site, which is now kind of accommodation to many people, mostly various, mostly Asian and Russian and Asian students and youth, but they paid attention to develop the community at the same time. So there are high hopes it will not turn into some kind of ghetto. Those people, and indeed anyone who got educated in England and had their secondary education upwards in England, generally speaking, so not in the fields of research, for instance, or philosophy or social sciences, but otherwise, those people simply did not receive any tools to use in situations when there is no guarantee with regard to the outcome, when the outcome is unpredictable, uncertain, or even it is difficult to establish what kind of course of action would be appropriate, ethical, and morally sound. I find that nobody pretty much who had a secondary education or up in the United Kingdom or England most specifically these days had any kind of idea about a moral compass or moral imperative, as Immanuel Kant called it. They have great difficulties to decide what is good, what is bad, even though if they feel the pain at times of incivility. Also, I have experienced that morality or moral compass for many, particularly in management position, when they feel that they are expected to have that kind of moral compass sound without any training or any opportunity to practice it, because again, morality is not only a question of knowledge, not only a question of knowing what is good or bad, but also a question of practicing, relating, love, relating, morals, ethics. These are not just theories, these are skills that need practicing between people. Interaction is a lot more important than anything else. No policy, relationship, power, or any kind of arrangement or institute worth it, which disconnects people. Only the ones that connect or reconnect truly, meaningfully, people worth it. Why? Again, I need to refer back to a previous content also to be found on YouTube, which was dealing with this Canadian research. I think it was at Canary Wharf nearly a year ago, last December, I had that content shot at Canary Wharf. And I was talking about this Canadian research, what they could find that ever since had gone worldwide across cultures. And we could confirm what is important to people at the end of their lives. What determines the quality of their lives. Nothing else, not money, no power, no belongings, no property, no status, no position, no belief. What is most important to people at the end of their life is the quality of their relationships. Nothing else. That also, with the pandemics, it came to light what is important to people who at work, on what basis they feel they want to go to work in the morning, they contribute, they belong, what determines their experience at their workplace. Two little things, one of them, if they've got the feeling that they listened to. And the other one, if any little control over the job they're doing. So micromanagement by a manager is actually against people's good experiences at work. We need to stop, pause and think right now and allow ourselves the emotions that are coming from the fact that most of people, particularly mid-management in England these days, have no tools whatsoever, had no education or tools whatsoever to manage questions that has a moral or an ethical streak or a level of complexity to it. And that resulted in an experience I had myself personally these days, which was the most most extraordinary. I did not believe my own eyes and my own ears, so I leant into that discomfort a number of times and got wounded by it. That privilege in England these days is not attainment-based. Whereas in Central Europe and in Hungary, privilege is pretty much attainment-based, meaning if you are rich, or your parents were rich, or if you could manage to get a doctorate, or finish the university, both society and people, generally speaking, will treat you with a certain amount of respect, and you've got a certain number of privileges existing. In the UK, and particularly in England, it's different. Privilege is always relation-based. For the same person, or perception-based, for the same person to be perceived, I don't know, disabled, or different, or diverse, could be suffering the most ferocious incivility from anybody in England, purely based on the perception. Do not forget, human beings has an unalienable right, which is to make a choice how to behave, how to relate to things. This is the only thing cannot be taken away from any human being. Dignity, property, money, job. Anything can be taken away from anybody, but one thing, the ability to make a choice how to relate to things, cannot be taken away from anybody. Therefore, that was the thing really got me going with this issue about morality and surprised me the most. I don't think that people who were educated in England are vile. They're not choosing that fear-based, very immature most of the time, reaction that vindictiveness, that manipulation often, because they are bad or they are essentially sinister. No, they have no other options. In fact, because of the fear response to difference, irregularity, diversity even, got kind of educated into them, as it were, basically, in the absence of any other options. It's all amygdala orchestrated, it's all adrenaline, all steroid, corticosteroid mediated response, meaning their bandwidth to see other options is so narrow, they actually cannot see the opportunities that would give space to experience creativity, curiosity, and innovation. And because they don't have the tools to maintain or refer to moral compass, things like trust, dignity, kindness, that kind of things, have no practical experience coded into their behavior. I don't want to give alibi, as it were, to people who are behaving with incivility. But it is important to understand one thing. In the United Kingdom, in the second year of the pandemics, approximately every fourth, every third person has an undiagnosed, unmanaged mental health condition, which is not being treated, not being managed, not being looked after. If in any cohort of people, 30% of the population has a mental health condition, as such, it is so prevalent in the community, in the society, we can no longer blame people for their behavior. There is something wrong with the culture. This is the point when we're going to continue next time. Good evening from the heart of Budapest. This is 1st of November 2021. It started to rain. This is All Saints' Day, which is a bank holiday, a public holiday here in Hungary, and preceding the day of the death, when people visiting their family deaths, as it were, in cemeteries across the country. It's a beautiful and very important celebration, and I'm so grateful to be able to hear, which was absolutely unexpected, because it gives me an opportunity to reflect on how I relate to personal loss. Let that be anything, but most importantly, connections with people. Good evening.